This week's writing hack is how to write a bad news email. As I record this, we're in the midst of the corona health crisis. And so if you're like most businesses, you may be writing more bad news messages than usual. You may, for instance, be needing to communicate changes in your hours of service, changes in the way you do business, changes in the availability of supplies, so on and so forth. And so the good news here is that there's actually a formula I'm going to share with you that will make it easy for your readers to understand and accept and cooperate with the bad news you have to deliver. Now, I should say that this formula I'm going to share with you assumes that you want to protect and nurture the relationship you have with your audience. There are certain situations in which really doesn't matter too much how you deliver the bad news because you don't care what happens with that relationship. But I'm assuming that this is a relationship you want to protect. So here's how the formula works. I'll walk you through the basic elements and then give you a really quick, very simple example. So you start with laying a foundation that's a little bit of a context that gives a cue or a clue that something unusual is coming. So you're not just dropping a bombshell, and we'll see how that works in a moment. And then what you do is you provide good reasons for the bad news that's coming. It's really critical that you provide this rationale up front before you give the bad news, and that you present it in a way that's personally meaningful to your audience. That's why I say it's a reader-centered rationale. Then, and only then, now you've done this prep work, are you ready to deliver the bad news. It's critical here that you deliver this clearly, unambiguously. This formula is not about downplaying the bad news, soft pedaling it, distracting people from it. It's simply about preparing them for it so they don't miss it, because you really need them to understand the bad news if you're working toward that goal of enabling them to accept it and cooperate with you to continue your relationship. So after your bad news, another way that you work toward that cooperation is you actually present your readers with an alternative. And the reason you do that is this. When we're presented with a piece of bad news and somebody says basically, oh, you can't do something, then we have this kind of knee-jerk psychological reaction. We want to, act out against whoever has given us this bad news. We want to kick back. When you provide an alternative, you provide a framework of choice so that people then can kind of fulfill that urge to react, but they can do so along a channel that you've provided that keeps that relationship growing in a positive way. And finally, this is a really important part of your message, you want to provide a closing that indicates that you want to preserve this audience and preserve this relationship and keep it growing. So it's positive and it's forward looking. So let me show you just a very, very simple example of how this plays out so you can see how these parts fit together and think about how you might be able to use it in your circumstances. Context. So if you're writing this during the coronavirus crisis, you might just say something like, during this challenging time, that might be enough to clue people in, we're putting your health and the health of our community first. So this is clearly a setup for something that's coming. You're putting my health first. Oh, okay, I'm not used to hearing that from you, unless maybe you're a doctor's office. So there's something different here because it sounds like there might be a slight realignment of priorities. So from there, then we have the reader-centered rationale. Like you, notice that we want to protect the most vulnerable among us, especially our seniors and those with health issues. I'm enabling here the reader to visualize maybe the vulnerable people they're related to, people in their community. So we're doing everything we can to stop the coronavirus from spreading. So this really connects to that first paragraph saying that we're putting the health of the community first. Notice here what doesn't happen. The writing is not hiding behind public policy. It's not saying government policy said this, social distancing measures are in effect. That is the surest way to really kill the effectiveness of a bad news message is to mention policy as the reason that you're doing something. You want to make it clear that your rationale for the bad news you're delivering has to do with what matters to your audience. Then it's time to give the bad news, and you want to do that in a way that's very clear. And in fact, you'll see in this example, the bad news is actually delivered twice in two different ways, one positive and one negative, so that there's no way it can be missed. So starting March 30th, we'll be offering our Digital Strategy 101 sessions through Zoom rather than in-person consultations. Now, if you missed what's happening there, it's then spelled out in a negative. We won't be holding any face-to-face meetings until further notice. Okay, very clear. But then there's an alternative. So you'll find attached a calendar invite for your Zoom session. Notice, if you're not a fan of video conferencing, you could also meet with your digital strategy advisor by phone. Now that may seem like a pretty, kind of like a small move to make, a small gesture, but it gives that element of choice that's so crucial. Something is not being forced on the audience here. They have some choice, some leeway. And then finally, we have a forward-looking closing, which doesn't use artificial canned language like, we value your patronage, right? Or you are a valued customer. It's more personal than that, more natural sounding. We're eager to help your business adapt and move forward under the strange new conditions we're all facing, right? We're all in this together. It goes back to that idea of the community mentioned up front. Please let us know which option will work best for your upcoming consult. So there's that sense, there's a call to action here, moving forward, and stay safe. So again, a very personal, reader-centered ending. So the point here is not to downplay the bad news, not to apologize for the bad news. The point is to present the bad news with compassion and with clarity so that you achieve two goals. You get your reader to accept the bad news and you get them to cooperate with you so you can keep that relationship growing going forward. So I hope these tips are useful to you this week and beyond.